Patricia Langford stood at her fence, arms folded tightly across her chest, watching the white chairs and rose arch being set up next door. "This is revolting," she muttered, her voice thick with disgust. "An absolute stain on this street." She spat toward the fence. "Filthy people, turning my neighborhood into a garbage dump. This is where respectable families live, not where street rats throw their ghetto parties." She dialed 911 without a second thought. "Send officers now. Black people, dozens of them trespassing, polluting my property. I want them dragged out." Across the fence, Russell Whitaker, 70 years old, and dressed in a navy suit with a white rose pinned to his chest, set down a vase of flowers. He had heard every word. He chose to let it go. What Patricia did not know was that the bride she had just dismissed as trash held the power to end careers and send people to prison. The Whitaker home sat at the end of a tree-lined street in Savannah's historic district. Spanish moss hung low from live oaks that had stood longer than anyone on the block. The house itself was colonial style, with white columns, a wraparound porch, and a front door painted deep green. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just solid and proud. Russell's father had bought this house decades earlier, paid for it with 31 years of Postal Service wages. Back then, he was one of 3 black homeowners on the entire street. Now, generations later, Russell was the last one. The neighborhood had changed around him. Newer homes, wealthier families, whiter faces. But this house, this piece of land, had stayed in the family. And today, it was dressed for a wedding. White chairs sat in neat rows across the back lawn. An arch wrapped in ivory roses and trailing green vines stood at the center. Glass lanterns lined the stone path from the porch to the altar. Catering staff moved between tables, carrying trays of shrimp and grits, sweet tea in mason jars, and peach cobbler set out on silver stands. A string quartet warmed up beneath a white canopy, the sound of violins drifting through the warm afternoon air. 80 guests were expected, family from Atlanta, friends from D.C., colleagues from across the state. The yard filled slowly as people arrived in their Sunday best. Bright hats, tailored suits, children in matching outfits chasing one another around the oak trees. Upstairs in her childhood bedroom, Jasmine Whitaker stood in front of a mirror. The wedding dress was elegant but simple. Ivory silk, long sleeves, a cathedral veil that pooled behind her on the hardwood floor. She wasn't fussing with her hair or adjusting her jewelry. She was standing still, looking at a framed photograph on the dresser. Her mother, gone more than a decade now. Jasmine picked up the frame, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She simply breathed. A knock at the door. Russell stepped in. He saw his daughter in that dress and stopped cold. His lip trembled. His eyes filled. "Your mother would have had something perfect to say right now," he said, his voice cracking. "You look like her, baby. You look just like her." Jasmine smiled and set the photo back down gently. Right beside it on the nightstand sat a thick leather binder, legal briefs, case files, a schedule marked in red ink. Even on her wedding day, the work followed her. But she had closed that binder that morning and hadn't touched it since. Today, she wasn't a judge. Today, she was just a daughter, a bride. She took her father's arm. "Let's go, Daddy." Downstairs, Andre Reed waited near the altar. He wore his army dress blues, medals pinned, shoes polished to a mirror shine, posture straight as a flagpole. More than 2 decades of service, 2 combat tours, a retired colonel who now ran a non-profit building. Housing for homeless veterans. He stood with his hands clasped, calm on the outside, But when he saw Jasmine step through the back door onto the porch, his jaw tightened and his eyes went glassy. The quartet began to play. Guests rose. Russell walked his daughter down the stone path, one slow step at a time. Sunlight cut through the moss-draped branches above. The scent of jasmine and fresh-cut grass hung in the air. A little girl in a yellow dress scattered rose petals ahead of them. It was perfect. For a brief, perfect stretch of time, everything was absolutely perfect. Next door, behind a lace curtain on the second floor, Patricia Langford watched it all. Her arms were folded, her jaw set. On the desk behind her sat a thick manila folder labeled HOA Complaints. It was stuffed with papers, 6 years' worth. 23 complaints filed against the Whitaker family. Noise, vehicles, suspicious guests, lawn height. Not a single one had ever been upheld. But today, Patricia wasn't filing paperwork. She had already made the call. And 2 streets away, red and blue lights were already turning on. The vows had just begun. Jasmine stood facing Andre beneath the rose-covered arch. The officiant, a silver-haired pastor who had baptized Jasmine as an infant, opened his Bible and smiled at the couple. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak canopy, casting soft golden light across the ceremony. 80 guests sat still. Even the children had gone quiet. Jasmine took Andre's hands. Her fingers trembled just slightly, not from nerves, but from the fullness of the moment. More than a decade without her mother, more than 2 decades of Andre's military service that had kept them apart more than together. And now, finally, this day. "Sirens," someone whispered, distant at first. A low wail somewhere beyond the trees, then closer, louder, then unmistakable. Red and blue lights strobed through the gaps in the fence, flashing across the white tablecloths, across the glass lanterns, across the faces of 80 guests who had come to witness love, not this. 2 squad cars pulled it up hard to the curb. Tires crunched gravel. Engines cut. Doors swung open one after the other with the heavy mechanical thud that changes the air in any room or any yard. The string quartet stopped mid-note. The pastor froze, his Bible still open. Jasmine's fingers tightened around Andre's hands. Her veil caught a gust of warm wind and swept sideways like a flag nobody had raised. Every single guest turned toward the street. Officer Derek Cole stepped out of the first cruiser. He was young, early 30s, buzz cut, mirrored sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. His jaw was set like a man arriving at a crime scene, not a celebration. His hand rested on his belt near the holster, not gripping, just resting. Close enough to send a message that didn't need words. His partner, Officer Laura Bennett, exited the second car. She moved slower, more careful. Her eyes scanned the yard, the flowers, the chairs, the guests in tailored suits and Sunday dresses, the children in matching outfits clutching their mother's hands. Her brow furrowed. Something about this scene didn't match the call she had heard on the radio. Not even close. But Derek didn't scan anything. He didn't pause. He didn't assess. He walked straight in, past the gate, past the stone path, past elderly women in church hats who pressed their purses to their laps, past toddlers sitting wide-eyed on their father's knees, past a table stacked with wrapped wedding gifts and a 3-tiered cake topped with ivory flowers. He stopped 5 feet from the altar, boots planted on the grass where rose petals had just been scattered. "We got a noise complaint and a report of a possible disturbance," he said, his voice loud, louder than it needed to be. Every guest heard it. Every child flinched. "Who's in charge here?" The pastor stepped back. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind across water. Russell rose from his front row seat, slowly, deliberately. He straightened his navy jacket, touched the white rose on his lapel, and walked toward Derek with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who had spent his whole life being calm when the world gave him every reason not to be. "I'm the homeowner, officer. This is my property. Has been for generations. My daughter is getting married today. That's all that's happening here." He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out his driver's license, held it out. Steady hand, steady eyes. Derek glanced at it for less than a second. He didn't take it, didn't read the name, didn't check the address printed right there in black and white. His eyes were already moving past Russell, scanning the crowd slowly, deliberately, like he was cataloging faces, looking for something, or pretending to. "You got a permit for this?" Russell blinked. "A permit? Officer, this is a private ceremony on private property. Savannah City Code does not require a permit for a private gathering on residential land. I checked before we set up. I've lived here." Derek held up one finger. "I didn't ask how long you've lived here. I asked about the permit. Do you have one? Yes or no?" Laura stepped closer and spoke near Derek's shoulder, her voice low but clear. "Derek, the code doesn't cover private events. This is clearly a wedding. We should document the call and clear out." Derek didn't turn his head. "I'll handle it." 3 words. Cold. Final. He said them the way a man says things when he's already made up his mind, and the facts don't matter anymore. At the fence line, right on cue, a figure appeared. Patricia Langford walked across her manicured side yard with her arms folded tight against her chest. Her chin was lifted, her lips pressed thin. She positioned herself at the exact edge of the property line, not 1 inch on Whitaker land, but close enough to be heard by everyone on it. "Thank God you're here, officer." Her voice was sharp and carried across both yards like a church bell nobody asked to ring. "This has been going on all morning. I've told them multiple times about the noise, the disruption, the vehicles blocking the road. They don't listen." She cleared her throat. "They never listen." Russell didn't turn to face her. His eyes stayed locked on Derek. "That woman has filed 23 complaints against my family over the past 6 years. Not one, not a single one has ever been upheld." Patricia's voice sliced back immediately. "That's because nobody takes it seriously. Look at this chaos. Look at what they've done to this street. This isn't a neighborhood event. It's a takeover. It's an occupation." Derek raised one hand toward Russell. "Step back, sir. I'm standing on my own property, officer, and I'm conducting an investigation. Step back now." The yard went dead silent. Not a murmur, not a whisper. 80 people frozen, watching a 70-year-old black man in a suit being told to step back on his own land at his own daughter's wedding chan an officer who hadn't read his name, hadn't checked his address, hadn't asked one valid legal question. That's when Andre moved. He stepped down from the altar platform and walked toward the officers with the same measured stride he had used on military bases across the world. His dress blues were crisp, every medal aligned, the colonel's eagle glinting on his shoulder, shoes polished to a mirror shine. His posture was straight, his face was calm, his eyes locked forward. He stopped in front of Derek and extended his right hand. "Officer, I'm Andre Reed, United States Army retired. I'm the groom. This is our wedding ceremony on private property with invited guests only. Can you tell me the specific ordinance that's been violated?" Derek looked at the outstretched hand. He didn't shake it. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and let me do my job. I'm asking a simple, lawful question. What specific law are we breaking right now?" I said step back. And I asked what law. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The breeze rustled the rose petals beneath the arch. Somewhere in the back row, a child whimpered and pressed his face into his mother's neck. The scent of jasmine and peach cobbler still hung in the air, a cruel reminder of what this day was supposed to be. Laura spoke again, quieter this time, almost pleading. "Derek, this is a noise complaint. We document, we leave. That's the procedure." Derek didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he turned away from Andre and pointed toward the catering station, where a young man in a vest was pouring sweet tea into mason jars. "Who's that? Does he work here? He got an ID on him?" Then he pointed at a group of men standing near the gift table. "What about them? I need names. I need to confirm every person on this property is here with authorization." Russell's voice came low and firm, barely above a whisper, but it carried. "You are not going to walk through my daughter's wedding and card my family and friends like criminals. Not today." Derek turned back to him slowly. "Sir, I have warned you once about obstruction. I won't warn you again." From her post at the fence, Patricia leaned in. "See? See what I mean? No respect. Zero. I've been dealing with this for years. They think they own this neighborhood." She said it loud. She meant for everyone to hear. Jasmine still hadn't moved from the altar. Her veil drifted in the breeze. Her bouquet hung at her side. White knuckles wrapped around the stems so tightly the ribbon was creasing. Her eyes tracked every movement, every word, every gesture. She watched the officer who hadn't once stated a valid legal basis. She watched her father being talked down to on land his family had owned before that officer was born. She watched Patricia performing outrage from the sideline like a director watching her own show. 2 steps behind Jasmine, her cousin Xavier stood with his phone raised. The camera was recording. The red light blinked steadily. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. Every second was being captured. Jasmine looked at her father. She looked at her fiancé. She looked at the badge on Derek's chest, and she looked at Patricia, the woman who had spent 6 years trying to push her family off land they'd owned for generations. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed to a focus that anyone who had ever stood in her courtroom would have recognized instantly. But she didn't speak. Not yet. She knew exactly what this was. She had seen it 100 times in depositions, in sworn testimony, in case law she had studied for 2 decades, and in rulings she had written with her own hand. But today, she wasn't behind the bench. Today, she was a black bride in a white dress watching her wedding be torn apart by an officer who didn't know her name, didn't know her title, and had no idea what he had just walked into. Derek wasn't slowing down. He was speeding up. He turned away from Russell and Andre and walked directly toward the seated guests, not to the side, not around the chairs. Straight down the center aisle. The same aisle Jasmine had just walked with her father minutes ago. Rose petals still crushed under his boots. "All right, I need everyone to have their IDs out. We're going to verify that every person on this property has a right to be here." An elderly woman in the second row, Andre's aunt, 84 years old, wearing a lavender hat with a silk flower pinned to the brim, looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. "ID? Baby, this is a wedding. I was invited. Ma'am, I need to see identification. Now." She fumbled with her purse. Her fingers were shaking. The clasp wouldn't open. A younger woman beside her leaned over to help, whispering, "It's okay, Auntie. It's okay." It was not okay. Derek moved to the next row. A man in his 60s, a retired school principal from Atlanta, sat with his wife. Derek pointed at him. "You. ID." The man stared. "Officer, I drove 4 hours to watch my goddaughter get married. You want to see my license for sitting in a chair?" "Sir, I won't ask again." The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket. His wife grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with something beyond anger, something old, something inherited, something that lived in the bones of every black family that had ever been stopped, questioned, and told to prove they belonged. 3 rows back, a young mother pulled her 5-year-old son onto her lap and covered his eyes with her hand. The boy squirmed. She held tighter. Her lips moved silently. A prayer, maybe. Or a promise that this wasn't the world he'd have to live in forever. Derek worked his way through the guests like he was processing inmates, row by row. No please. No thank you. No explanation. Just a finger pointed and a demand made. He wrote nothing down, checked nothing against any list. There was no list. There was no system. There was just a man with a badge asking black people to prove they had a right to exist in a space they'd been invited to with love. Laura stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. She watched her partner move through that crowd and said nothing. Later, she would say she wanted to. Later, she would say the words were right there in her throat. But right now, in this moment, she swallowed them. Derek returned to the front. He'd made a show for the guests. Now he wanted more. I'm going to need to do a walkthrough of the property. Inside the house. Russell stepped forward. Absolutely not. Sir, I have reason to believe. You have no reason. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause, and you do not have my permission. I don't need your permission if I have reasonable suspicion of what? Russell's voice rose. Not shouting, not even close, but firm. The kind of firm that comes from 70 years of patience finally meeting its limit. Suspicion of what? A wedding cake? A string quartet? What exactly are you suspicious of, officer? Derek didn't answer the question. He never answered questions. He gave orders. Step aside, sir. He moved toward the back porch, toward the door. Toward the home Russell's father had purchased decades earlier with 31 years of postal wages, toward the hallway where Jasmine's childhood photos still hung on the wall, toward the bedroom where just hours earlier a bride had held her dead mother's photograph against her chest and breathed. Andre moved first. He didn't run, didn't lunge. He simply walked to the back door and stood in the frame, feet shoulder-width apart. Hands at his sides, chin level. He blocked the entrance the way a man blocks something sacred, not with force, but with presence. You do not have permission to enter this home. You do not have a warrant. I am a retired officer of the United States military, and I am telling you clearly, this is a private residence, and you are not authorized to enter. Derek stopped 2 feet from Andre, close enough to smell the pressed wool of his dress blues, close enough to see every medal on his chest, including the Bronze Star, 3rd row, left side. Derek didn't look at the medals. He looked at the man, and his right hand moved slowly, deliberately, from his side to the grip of his service weapon. He didn't draw. He didn't have to. The message was clear. Every person in that yard saw it. Every phone that was recording caught it. Sir, if you do not step aside, I will arrest you for obstruction of justice and interference with a law enforcement officer. This is your only warning. Andre didn't blink, didn't shift his weight, didn't move 1 inch. Then you'll have to explain to a judge why you arrested an unarmed man at his own wedding for standing in his own doorway. Behind them, the crowd had gone from silent to something deeper, something heavier. Grandmothers clutched hymnals they'd brought as gifts. Men gripped the backs of chairs until their knuckles whitened. Children pressed against their parents, feeling the fear even if they couldn't name it. And at the fence, Patricia watched it all. She didn't just watch. She nodded slowly, approvingly, like a woman watching a plan come together. Her arms were still crossed, her chin still lifted. She caught Derek's eye and gave him the smallest tilt of her head. Keep going. Jasmine saw it. She saw the nod. She saw the tilt. She saw exactly who was directing this and who was performing. She stepped forward from the altar. Her dress brushed the grass. Her veil trailed behind her like a ghost of the ceremony that had just been stolen. She stopped 6 feet from Derek and spoke. Her voice was calm, measured. Every word chosen the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. Precise, Deliberate. Cutting. Officer, you responded to a noise complaint regarding a private event on private property. You have established no probable cause. You have produced no warrant. You have unlawfully detained guests, demanded identification without legal basis, and are now attempting to enter a private home in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. I strongly advise you to reconsider your next action. Derek turned to her. He looked at the woman in the wedding dress, looked at her the way he had looked at every other person in that yard, like she was something to manage, something to handle, something beneath the badge. He smirked. Ma'am, I don't need a law lesson from someone in a wedding dress. Step back, or you'll be joining your husband in cuffs. From the fence, Patricia added her voice, loud, theatrical, aimed at Derek like a weapon handed to a willing hand. See? This is exactly what I was talking about. No respect. None. For the law. For the neighborhood. For anything. Derek turned back to Andre. Hands behind your back. What am I being charged with? Obstruction of justice. Resisting a lawful order. Hands behind your back. Now. The yard held its breath. Andre looked past Derek, past the badge, past the smirk, past the hand still resting on the weapon, and found Jasmine's eyes. She looked back at him. And in that look was everything. Every year of service, every sacrifice, every fight they had survived separately and together. But underneath all of it was something quieter, something that didn't need words. I trust you. Handle this. Andre turned around. He placed his hands behind his back. Slowly, with the precision and discipline of a man who had spent his life following orders, even the unjust ones. Because he understood something Derek never would. Compliance is not agreement. Silence is not surrender. The handcuffs clicked shut. A decorated colonel of the United States Army in full-dress blues, medals shining in the afternoon sun, was handcuffed at his own wedding, on his own property, in front of 80 guests who had come to celebrate love. A grandmother in the third row covered her mouth with both hands. A grown man in the back wiped his eyes with his sleeve and looked away. The 5-year-old boy who'd been sitting on his mother's lap stared at the handcuffs with wide, unblinking eyes, learning something no child should learn at a wedding. Laura finally spoke. Her voice cracked. Derek, I really think we need to call this in before I've got this under control. He gripped Andre's arm and began walking him toward the squad car. Jasmine watched her fiancé being led away. Her face didn't crumble. Her body didn't shake. She stood like marble, still, cold, unreadable. But behind her eyes, something shifted, something locked into place. The bride had stopped being a bride. The judge had entered the room. 2 steps behind her, Xavier lowered his phone just enough to whisper, I've got it all, Jasmine. Every single second. She didn't turn around. Her voice came quiet and steady. Good. Derek had one hand on Andre's arm and the other on the squad car door when Jasmine moved. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She reached into the small satin clutch sitting on the altar table and pulled out her phone. She dialed one number, Judge Philip Hartman, Chief Judge of the United States District Court, Southern District of Georgia. Her mentor, the man who had sworn her in the day she took the bench. He picked up on the first ring. Philip, it's Jasmine. I'm at my father's home. An officer has handcuffed my fiancé at our wedding. No warrant, no probable cause. He attempted illegal entry, demanded IEDs from elderly guests without legal basis, and is now walking Andre to a squad car. I need Chief Harlan notified immediately. She hung up, slid the phone back into the clutch, and stood perfectly still. The breeze caught her veil. Afternoon light hit the ivory silk of her dress. She looked like a portrait, calm, untouchable. But anyone who had ever stood in her courtroom would have recognized that stillness for what it was. Not peace, patience. The kind that comes right before a ruling that ends careers. Moments later, Derek reached for the car door handle. His radio crackled, a burst of static that cut through the warm air like breaking glass. The voice came through, clear, loud, every word a hammer. Unit 14, this is dispatch. You are on scene at the residence of Judge Jasmine Whitaker, United States District Court, Southern District. The homeowner's daughter is a sitting federal judge. Chief Harlan is en route. You are ordered to stand down immediately. Confirm receipt. Every guest heard it. Derek's hand froze. The color drained from his face, like watching a man realize he'd been standing on a cliff and just looked down. He turned around slowly. For the first time, he actually looked at Jasmine. Not past her, not through her, at her. Jasmine stood exactly where she'd been, veil drifting, bouquet at her side. 6 words. I told you to reconsider. No anger, no triumph, just a fact. Behind Derek, Laura was already moving. She reached Andre, fumbled the key twice with shaking hands, and unlocked the cuffs. Sir, I am so sorry. This should never. Andre rubbed his wrists. Red marks circled both. The kind that photograph well in evidence files. He looked at Laura and nodded once, a nod that said, I know it wasn't you, but you let it happen. Soon after, a black SUV pulled up. No sirens, no lights, just a quiet arrival that meant something far worse. Chief Robert Harlan stepped out in civilian clothes, khakis, polo shirt, reading glasses still in his collar. Off duty. Saturday afternoon. He'd driven here personally because he understood exactly how bad this was. He took it all in. The disrupted ceremony, the trembling guests, the children clinging to parents, the groom rubbing red marks on his wrists, the bride, a federal judge, standing in her white dress beside a squad car on her father's lawn. He walked to Jasmine first. Your Honor, on behalf of the Savannah Police Department, I am deeply sorry. Jasmine shook his hand. One firm grip. No warmth. No absolution. Harlan turned to Derek. The young officer stood frozen by the cruiser, his mouth open, the beginning of an excuse. Harlan cut him dead. Officer Cole, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Badge and weapon. Now. Derek's hands trembled as he unclipped the badge. The metal made a small, final sound, landing in Harlan's palm. The weapon followed. Derek stood stripped of everything that had made him powerful minutes earlier. Harlan turned toward the fence. Patricia was still there, but changed. Arms fallen. Chin dropped. Face drained white. Ma'am, filing a false police report is a criminal offense under Georgia law. You'll be hearing from detectives. I suggest you contact an attorney. Patricia stammered. I had every right. This is my neighborhood. Ma'am? Harlan raised one hand. This is a wedding on private property. Go inside your home quietly. Patricia backed away step by step, turned, and walked inside. The screen door slapped shut behind her. In the yard, 80 guests sat in stunned, trembling silence. Not the silence of tragedy, the silence of correction. The moment when the air shifts and the world tilts back toward something that looks like justice. Derek stood beside his cruiser with nothing left. No badge, no weapon, just a uniform that no longer meant anything, and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He took 2 steps toward Andre. Sir, I didn't know. If I had known. Skasana mansum. Jasmine stepped between them. Her voice carried the same tone she used when addressing attorneys who had wasted her courtroom's time. Measured. Final. Impossible to appeal. You didn't need to know who I was. The law you swore to uphold applies the same whether the bride is a judge or a janitor. You weren't wrong because of who we are. You were wrong because of what you did. Derek opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A second unit arrived. 2 officers escorted Derek to the back seat. He climbed in without resistance. The door shut with a hollow thud. The cruiser pulled away. No sirens, no lights, just gone. Laura remained behind. She approached the supervising sergeant and gave a full voluntary statement. I knew he was escalating. I said something twice, but didn't physically intervene. I should have stopped him. I need that on record. She was placed on administrative leave. She handed over her body camera footage without being asked. The sergeant noted her as fully cooperative. The yard had changed. The flashing lights were gone. The cruisers had pulled away. 80 guests sat in white chairs, still as statues, unsure whether the day was over or just beginning. Russell Whitaker stood up. It took him a moment. One hand on the chair back, one hand smoothing his jacket. He touched the white rose on his lapel, still in place. He walked to the front and faced the guests. We have waited too long and come too far to let anyone steal this day. My baby girl is getting married right here, right now, on this land. Silence. Then Andre's aunt, the 84-year-old in the lavender ad who'd been asked for ID like a suspect, started clapping. Slow at first, then the row behind her joined, then the next, then everyone. The string quartet had picked up their bows. The wedding march filled the yard again, carrying something heavier than melody this time, something earned. The pastor returned beneath the arch, opened his Bible to the same page, looked at Jasmine and Andre with wet eyes. Shall we try this again? Jasmine laughed. The first time in an hour. The sound broke through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. They stood at the altar. Andre took her hands. The red marks on his wrists were still visible beneath his cuffs. Jasmine looked down at them, then up at him. Andre spoke his vows. His voice cracked on the third line. I chose you because you are the strongest person I've ever known. I've led men in combat, but I have never seen anyone stand the way you stood today. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lose yourself. You became the most powerful person in that yard without saying more than 50 words. I am so proud to stand beside you for the rest of my life. Jasmine blinked once, then spoke her own vows. The same ones she'd been interrupted saying an hour earlier. This time, no sirens, no boots on the grass, no radio static. Just her voice, his hands, and the afternoon sun. She finished every word. The pastor pronounced them married. Andre kissed his bride. 80 guests erupted. Cheers, tears, applause shaking the oak leaves overhead. The 5-year-old boy who'd watched the handcuffs with wide eyes was now throwing rose petals in the air and laughing. Next door, behind a second-floor curtain, Patricia Langford watched the celebration she had tried to destroy. She wasn't standing tall anymore. She wasn't smirking. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers. I think I need a lawyer. The video hit the internet before the cake was cut. Xavier uploaded the footage to his social media that evening. Unedited, 11 minutes long. Every second intact. The thumbnail alone was enough to stop anyone mid-scroll. A black man in full military dress blues, handcuffs on his wrists, standing beside a squad car, while a bride in a white wedding dress watched from 6 feet away. By the end of the day, it had millions of views. By the next morning, it was on every major news network in the country. The headline wrote itself. Every outlet ran some version of the same words. Officer handcuffs decorated colonel at his own wedding. Bride is federal judge. Cable news played the clip on loop. Morning shows opened with it. Social media turned it into a firestorm that no press release or department statement could contain. And the footage didn't just show the arrest, it showed everything. Derek marching down the aisle through seated guests. The 84-year-old aunt fumbling with her purse. The young mother covering her child's eyes. Russell being told to step back on his own property. Andre asking a lawful question and being met with a hand on a weapon. Jasmine reciting the Fourth Amendment in her wedding dress and being told she'd be put in cuffs for it. And it showed Patricia at the fence, arms crossed, nodding. That image, the neighbor nodding while a man was handcuffed, became its own symbol. Screenshots circulated with one-word captions. People recognized the gesture. They'd seen it before in their own neighborhoods, at their own front doors, in their own lives. The Savannah Police Department's Internal Affairs Division opened a formal investigation. The FBI joined. A federal civil rights inquiry under Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Investigators pulled everything. Derek's body camera, which he had forgotten to activate. The dash camera from his cruiser, which captured audio of the entire encounter. Laura's body camera, which she had surrendered voluntarily and which provided the clearest, most damning angle of all. Xavier's phone footage, security camera footage from 3 neighboring properties, witness statements from all 80 guests. The picture that emerged was not complicated. It was simple, systematic, and documented from 5 different angles. Then they pulled Derek's service record. 14 complaints were filed against him over several years, 11 from Black residents, 3 from Latino families. Excessive force allegations, twice. Unlawful detention, 3 times. Each complaint had been reviewed internally. Each one had been closed with the same 2 words, insufficient evidence. Not anymore. The grand jury convened. The indictments came fast. Against Officer Derek Cole, unlawful arrest, civil rights violations under Federal Statute Section 242, attempted illegal search and seizure, misconduct in office. 4 counts, each one carrying federal weight. His police certification was revoked by the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council before the trial even began. He would never wear a badge again in any state. Against Patricia Langford, filing a false police report under Georgia Code Section 161026. During the investigation, detectives documented her history. 23 complaints against the Whitaker family over 6 years. Not a single one substantiated. The pattern was so clear, it practically drew its own diagram. Prosecutors added a charge enhancement based on demonstrated racial motivation. The Whitaker family filed a separate civil suit against Patricia. Harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with a private event. Their attorney was Xavier. He had been preparing for this case in one form or another for 6 years. Derek's trial was held in federal court, a different district since Jasmine recused herself entirely. She didn't make calls, didn't pull strings, didn't need to. The evidence spoke in a voice louder than any judge's. The trial stretched over several days. Laura took the stand. She testified clearly and without hesitation. She described what Derek did, what she failed to do, and why. She didn't make excuses. When the defense attorney asked her if she believed Derek acted with racial bias, she paused for several seconds. Yes, I do, and I should have stopped it. The jury deliberated for several hours. Guilty, all counts. Sentencing followed shortly after. The presiding judge, a white woman in her 60s who had spent 30 years on the federal bench, looked at Derek and delivered words that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. She called it a grotesque abuse of public trust. She said the badge was meant to protect, not terrorize. She said that what happened in that yard was not a mistake. It was a choice made repeatedly at every turn when a different choice was available. 4 years. Federal prison. Derek showed no expression. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same kind he had put on Andre's wrists weeks earlier. Patricia's case was resolved faster. Her attorney advised her that the pattern of 23 baseless complaints made a trial unwinnable. She pleaded no contest. The sentence, 12 months probation, 200 hours of community service, specifically at the Savannah Civil Rights Education Center, where she would spend her weekends learning the history of the very people she had spent 6 years trying to silence. A restraining order, 500 feet from the Whitaker property, and full payment of the Whitaker family's legal fees in the civil suit. Simone Brooks, Jasmine's maid of honor and a journalist at a Savannah television station, produced a feature segment that aired nationally. The piece didn't just cover the wedding. It covered the pattern, the 23 complaints, the 14 internal affairs files on Derek that went nowhere, the system that let both Patricia and Derek operate unchecked for years. The Savannah Police Department announced a comprehensive reform package within the month. Mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, a civilian oversight board with subpoena power, a new protocol for noise complaints that required supervisory approval before any on-scene escalation, and an independent review of every excessive force complaint filed in the past 5 years. Jasmine was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Bar Association's annual conference. She accepted. She stood at the podium, not in her judicial robe, not in her wedding dress, but in a simple black suit, and spoke for 22 minutes. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about every family that didn't have a federal title to protect them, every cookout interrupted, every front porch where someone was asked to prove they belonged, every wedding, birthday, funeral, and Sunday dinner that had been treated as a threat simply because of the color of the people gathered. The room gave her a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. A scholarship fund was established in the Whitaker family name for law students from underrepresented communities. Andre's nonprofit received a wave of donations that allowed him to expand his veterans housing program into 2 new cities. And the video, Xavier's 11-minute recording, was entered into the permanent collection of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Some evidence gets filed away. Some evidence changes things. Months later, the Whitaker house still stood at the end of that tree-lined street in Savannah. Same white columns, same green door, same wraparound porch where 3 generations had sat and watched the world change around them without ever moving from their land. Russell was on the porch. Evening light came through the oak branches in long golden streaks. A glass of sweet tea sweated on the railing beside him. The chair next to his was empty, the one where his wife used to sit. He didn't fill it, never had, but tonight he looked at it and smiled instead of ached. Inside the house, the wedding photo sat on the mantel. Jasmine in ivory, Andre in dress blues. 80 guests behind them, standing, clapping, crying. And if you looked closely, in the bottom left corner, you could see a 5-year-old boy mid-throw, launching rose petals into the air with both hands. The best photo of the day, the one that made it real. Jasmine was back on the bench. Same courtroom, same rigor, same fairness she had carried her entire career. Attorneys who appeared before her noticed something, though. A new weight in the way she listened to testimony about traffic stops, noise complaints, and officers who forgot to turn on their body cameras. She didn't speak about the wedding in court. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. And everyone understood that the woman behind that bench had lived the cases she was ruling on. Andre broke ground on a new veterans housing development, 42 units, permanent supportive housing for homeless veterans. The kind of housing that didn't exist when he first came home from his second tour and watched men he'd served with sleep under bridges. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he wore his dress blues. A reporter asked if it was difficult to put them on again after what happened. Andre looked down at the medals on his chest and shook his head. These belong to me. No one gets to turn them into something painful. Not anymore. One evening, Jasmine found a letter in her courthouse mailbox. Handwritten. No return address on the envelope, but she recognized the postmark. Savannah. It was from Laura Bennett. Laura had resigned from the force months after the wedding. She'd enrolled in law school, first semester, night classes, working part-time to pay tuition. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs, an apology that didn't make excuses, a thank you that didn't ask for forgiveness, and one line at the end that Jasmine read twice. I stood there and did nothing. I won't spend the rest of my life being that person. Jasmine wrote back the same week. Next door to the Whittaker house, a for sale sign stood in Patricia Langford's front yard. It had been there for months. She was moving. Where? Nobody asked. Nobody cared enough to. On her last day, neighbors watched her load boxes into a rental car, alone. No one helped carry anything. No one crossed the street to say goodbye. No one waved. The woman who had spent 6 years trying to decide who belonged in that neighborhood had gotten her answer. She didn't. The HOA complaint folder, the thick manila one she had kept on her desk like a trophy, sat in the recycling bin at the curb. 6 years of grievances. 23 baseless reports. All of it waiting for a trash truck that would come and take it exactly where it belonged. Derek was serving his sentence in a federal facility. His appeal had been filed and denied. His name was now a case study in police training academies across 3 states, listed under a module titled Abuse of Authority, What Not to Do. Cadets would study his decisions the way medical students study surgical errors, not to understand the man, but to prevent the next one. Justice doesn't always arrive on time. It doesn't always arrive at all. But on one afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, it showed up in a white dress and a cathedral veil, and it didn't need to raise its voice. The Whittakers didn't need a title to deserve dignity, but it shouldn't have taken one to receive it. That's the part that stays with you, not the badge being surrendered, not the handcuffs clicking open, not the guilty verdict. Those are satisfying, and they should be. But the part that stays is the question underneath all of it, the one that doesn't have a comfortable answer. What happens to the family that doesn't have a federal judge in a wedding dress? What happens when there's no phone call to make? No chief who shows up in minutes? No camera recording every second? What happens then? That's not a story question. That's a real one. And it's yours to answer. So tell me, if you were sitting in one of those white chairs, watching it unfold, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have spoken up? Would you have hit record? Drop your answer into the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you angry or hopeful or both, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button. Subscribe, because stories like this don't just entertain, they start conversations. And conversations are where change begins.